Hello everybody. You've probably noticed the flood of AI generated images online and everywhere, right? On Instagram, on TikTok, on Pinterest, all these beautiful shots of products, original perspectives, new original shapes. But let me tell you one thing, these are not design concepts. And in this video, I will break down to you 5 reasons why these images do not account for design concepts and what we can do instead with them, how to elevate them, and how to move on to elevate our design game as a whole while being able to rely on AI and spot the problems they deliver. Reason number one why these Midjourney generated images are not design concepts. Appearance. So I mean, at first, if you look at these images, they make a really good first impression. They are cinematically composed into the shot. The light is dramatic. The materials look cool. The shape is like original. Everything is seemingly convincing. But if you take a deeper look, you quickly notice that there's just some things that are not right. There's impossible geometries. We have weird surfaces that twist and bend, and transitions that are not realistic. But also, just in terms of functionality, just some things don't make any sense at all. In general, these images, they create a lot of open questions when you take a deeper look at them. For example, how does the backside look? Even if you have like a 2D impression of one object, it's absolutely unclear how the backside looks, how it translates to all the other directions, especially when it comes to cables and connections. Like, what are things that we have to consider for a product like that that is not visible in one two-dimensional perspective shot, right? For this analysis, I purposely selected a concept that seems really simple and realistic in terms of shaping the forms and the geometries, right? And still, I want to take this example to make sure that you understand that even those simple and seemingly correct product images come with loads of issues that make them difficult to use for the next stages of the product design process. So I think the first one that comes to mind when you look at this one is that these buttons don't seem to be functional at the location that they are placed in right here. Like, they're at the bottom. So first of all, the user can see the icons on them, and it's much more difficult to reach with your fingers into that space compared to when these buttons would be on top. Also, we have this wooden base here and the spherical shape on top of it. I'm not sure if this image is indicating a removability. Are they permanently connected? Are they temporarily connected? Or are they not connected at all? Obviously, these things don't have to be defined by AI, right? We can now look at this image and make a choice about it. If you choose either option, it has consequences for the design that have to be considered, which are not reflected in the image as they are at the moment, right? So we have the functional problems, we have the uncertainty about the way these volumes interact together, and we have absolutely no idea what happens at the backside. And here I just look at other additional examples to make the point more clear. So I think in this example, it's very obvious that these surfaces are really strange, right? So they go straight at the back, but they bend towards the front. I'm not saying that it's not possible to make these geometries. It's not straightforward how you would make them. Is it like a deep drawn thing? Do you need a mold in order to create that? And can you reliably create a clean bend and not this messy appearance that it actually shows in this image? Sometimes it's not clear if the chamfer goes inwards or outwards, or where it transitions from either direction. So we have all these inconsistencies. In order to take this to the next stage, we would have to make adjustments and modify this object. And then how close can we stay to the image if that's the chosen image, right? Another example here, again, like a weirdly twisted surface. And then we have here an inner edge that somehow still overlays, but then it goes into the surface. It creates a lot of tension. It is a dynamic surface, right? Interesting. But also, how's the transition from this surface and that surface over here? Really not straightforward to make. So obviously the AI doesn't think about all these things, so it's unfair to scrutinize the algorithm. But if we were to use this image as a design concept proposal, we have to make sure that we think about these things and that we have an answer to these questions. The next point, I think is much more relevant even, is manufacturing. So all these images look beautiful, but are they at all even manufacturable, right? So if you go back to the original, how is the wooden base made? Is it just a turned piece? Is it hollow? What material is it? What about the sphere itself? Is it injection molded? Is it from plastic? And if it's molded, where are the parting lines? Where do these shapes and volumes detach from each other? Would we have parting lines visible or not? And if so, which direction? Do we have to consider draft angles and other things? Can we use standard parts like this metal ring around the speaker? We cannot find the answer to these questions in the image. We have to think of these things ourselves. And if we start to implement them, we will soon understand that there are things that we have to change, that we have to deviate from the original idea image in order to turn it into a real concept. Other examples here. We even have a parting line, right? But is it realistic? And does it go on this way also on the other side? I would say that this becomes difficult because if it would just go along this line, then you could mold it potentially, but now it wraps around to the front. So we create an undercut surface that is not easily moldable. Also the mesh here is like a deep drawn mesh. How do we get this pill shape into the mesh? And now this obviously looks really cool because of the lighting here inside, but I suppose the drivers are supposed to be in here, right? So a big effect is already lost when we actually translate the shape into the use case that we aim for. How can we divide the volume in order for it to be manufacturable if it's an injection molded part? What are the common techniques used for Bluetooth speakers? I suppose mostly it's plastic injection molded because we have high numbers, right? But we also have metal parts. Are these painted plastic parts or are they actually from metal? Are they deep drawn or do we use other processes to get to that shape? Where's the driver here? Is there like a display and this is the driver, or is that the interface? And this is potentially the space for the drivers. Again, here now we have a cylinder, like a much more common shape, right? But again, injection molding does not really work well for these kinds of shapes because we have to consider the draft angle. So is it like an extrusion or is it a folded sheet that comes together at the bottom where we have another functional part anyways? Or is it just coated plastics after all? And what happens exactly at the bottom here? Like, do we have to cut things out of a cylinder or do we have to do some organic surfacing at the bottom of the cylinder and only at the top it looks like a clean cylinder? Like overall, I think this is an interesting shape for a Bluetooth speaker, right? I really like the material combination here. We have this metallic dark blue with like ornamental golden accents and dark wood. So it looks really premium overall, even though a little bit old school. But still, all these questions about how can we actually make this are left unanswered. And it takes a lot of time and it's a big step to actually go from this image to realistic geometry that can be made. Very simple geometry again, right? You would think that it's easy to make this, and it potentially is quite easy to make, but it will change things. Like if this is the parting line, then we have the mold that goes to the bottom and one that goes to the top. And then we have like a much stronger differentiation between the direction of the bottom part and the top part. And then we really lose the organic cubic shape here. Point number 3, and this point is assembly, right? So how does the product assemble? Even if we ignore the fact that we don't know how it's made, can we infer something about the assembly of this object? Do we have to think of snap fits, hooks, and fasteners? Can we attach things with screws, bolts, or other fixation methods? Are they visible or not? So, I mean, also when I just sketch an idea, these kinds of information are potentially not even clear for me as a designer yet in that initial stage either. So why should I compare or ask that much of this image already? So for once, these images are so realistic that they do not allow as much space for mistakes and errors because the client sees this image and he perceives it as a real object. And it's on us as designers to tell them and make sure that they understand that this is not real. This is why sketches are so helpful because it's clear that it's not a final product and it's much more easy to openly discuss changes and make acceptable also the things that are not yet clear, that they will become more specified in the future. But at this level of detail and refinement in the images generated with AI, clients are usually much less open to accept the insecurities that are still unclear within the concept and take it at face value. Let's have a look at our object again, right? So if I were to make this, I probably would make this as an injection molded part with a parting line going from the bottom of the sphere all the way to the top. And then we have a parting line here. And then we could potentially screw it from the back with the dashed line here. But then we also would have holes where the screws have to fit through, right? And also we would require some sort of connection between the sphere and the base. Maybe it's just a magnet and then it just falls into place, but how can we ensure that the orientation of the thing is correct? Or if it's fixed, then we need some sort of fastening mechanism, maybe a click, maybe whatever. Another example here, again, very simple shape, right? We have a sphere of almost concrete stone-like character with wood. We have some, it looks like USB connectors or something, but we don't have visible assembly. So how would this wood plate be connected to the side of this sphere? Is it just glued? Is it screwed? If so, where's the screw? How can we see it? Is it from the bottom? Is that a U profile that actually goes all the way through and we just put it on top? Also here, the top plate, it sits in this nice little nook very neatly without any visible assembly options. So how is that possible? How can we access the internals? How can we put things together to get to that appearance? There must be some thoughts that we put into the process beforehand to make sure that this is even feasible. So this is also a recommendation for the sketching process, right? While you ideate, you already can start thinking about, all right, this goes here, this part has to be attached to this part, so I have to already consider the screwing holes from this direction. They will be least visible from the bottom, whatever. So you achieve the concept also the way you want it to when you realize it. There are some products that are more easy to translate into realistic objects than others if they're generated with AI, and especially like chairs and very archetypal products that have a very clear archetypal shape usually fare better in terms of translatability into real ideas and concepts. For example, this chair, so it's wood, right? So we know there is some bending of wood involved. Wood chairs can often be glued, right? So if it's all glued, how can it be transported? So if you want to create this concept in that appearance, you would have to create it in such a way that it can only be transported as a finished piece. So this is the problem, right? The fourth mistake that I see in AI generated images is that there's no consideration of the internals, right? We usually cannot give the AI a reference for dimension and volumes. So we don't know how big the battery is, what size and shape the PCB would have. Also the speaker, the driver itself, and LEDs, all these things, they take space. And AI doesn't know the space they take. So it just creates something that looks proportional, but potentially might be completely not usable. Again, so we have a huge driver here, right? So I do feel like it would fit into the sphere just based on an initial feeling, but I'm not sure how the buttons would connect to the PCB and the control of the whole system. Where is the PCB at the base? Is that a reason why it would be there in the first place? Or can it squeeze somewhere behind the driver? And then it's still really difficult to make this assessment. You probably have to go through the Google search, find speakers, maybe disassemble. Another example here, we have like all these drivers on the side that look to me like the spacing is really tight. So I have my doubts. Now we reach the fifth point, the fifth problem with AI generated images, and that is materials. So do we have workable materials? Are we using standard colors? So again, if we look at our base example, we see this is wood. So is this really wood or is it just water transferred plastic with like a water transfer coating? Again, the top one here. It has like some interesting texture, some speckle. Is this plastic or whatever? Is it like a pottery kind of design that brings like a very different sound to the whole composition? Are things metal? Are they plastic? What are the actual colors of this material here? I think it's really difficult to say because of the lights, right? All the different colors of the lighting. We have a blue light, we have a warm light, we have an even brighter light from the back, all with their own color. And then, yeah, is this now a gray or is it a black? And what you will see if you try the experiment yourself to model this in 3D and apply materials, that it will look completely different from what it looks here. This is another example. I think this is really interesting actually. Still take the moment to take inspiration and see if there are things that can be utilized for the project. For example, this looks to me like EPP, expanded polypropylene, right? And it's very lightweight. So the way this is presented here in an image, I think is really interesting. Maybe this is something to explore further, even though we cannot use it the way it is shown here because of the reasons that I mentioned before. But overall, take the things that are valuable and use them for your advantage. The driver mesh being presented as a transparent layer sort of. So how is that supposed to work? Is it like hard? Does it move or not? Is it like just a layer on top? Is there a hole in the middle? Or what exactly are we seeing here? But if you have inspiration images like this, like, can you translate them actually into a concept? If so, how? Is it like a display that just shows like an animation, or is it like these funny ferrofluidic speakers that are popping up on the market, but then with color? The images can be really convincing and strong inspirators. So look at them and take the best from the images without relying too much on the factor that this can be the real object, the final appearance of your design. You have to put in the work to translate it into a real concept before it reaches that stage. I would still warn from taking images generated with AI and show them directly to the client because of what I mentioned before. For them, at that stage of refinement, it feels like an already finished design. And then once you actually translate, do all the work, make it manufacturable and workable, there will be a dissonance between what the image showed originally and what the realistic project looks like. And maybe the client is not happy because it's not as emotional in the presentation as the AI render was, right? As cinematic and dramatic. So if you present an image to your client, make sure to communicate it clearly, but also maybe you can avoid it in the first place and put in the work ahead of time and evolve it into a realistic concept. So you also avoid the pitfalls of communication interference by AI images with the client. Also, a lot of the magic might get lost in translation, right? An image that we see is really strongly influenced by the emotional aspects like the lighting, the composition, the perspective, and all these things, they just become variables in the end product and are not set in stone anymore. So often the magic is just lost if you take the image and try to make a one-on-one replication of it. So I made this chair with Midjourney and I felt like, okay, this actually feels like it's a realistic design, so wooden base. But again, like how's the seating made? I'm not sure. I guess some plywood in there that is being bent. But how is it one part? Is it two parts? If it's two parts, how are they connected? And then I take the basic geometry, right? I do make some adjustments. So this is much more condensed and wider. I made it a little bit higher to actually be representative of realistic seating height. And yet I found that if I make the legs too wide, that they become more of an obstacle. So I had to compromise already, even though it can be made, the proportions change completely, right? Also, the way it's lit and represented here, it gives me a completely different vibe from the original image that I made with Midjourney. Another example is this bottle on the left. I think it looks really cool. There's a lot going on. At the same time, if you try to turn this into reality, that you will see that there's some surfaces here where it's absolutely unclear what's happening. And also here at the top, where it looks really sharp, and yet if you make it sharp, then it looks completely different. It's not perfectly round. All these little inconsistencies add up that just look a little bit off from the original, and then the magic is gone. That's what I meant. Yeah, I think I got not at all close to the original actually. It's just the colors and the composition, but the product itself is a completely different bottle if you ask me. This looked really cool to me, like a lot of tension up in here, but then I modeled this and I figured that this is crazy. Like it bends so dramatically to the sides. It looked strange in reality. It looks like it's melting. Also the lighting of the scene, I felt like I should be able to reconstruct it, but it's not like a straightforward scene, right? Or you deviate a little bit, which takes away again from the experience. All right. Now I've talked about all the things that you have to pay attention to when you work with AI generated images. I hope you now understand the aspects that are a problem when you look at AI generated images and what distincts them from concepts that are actually valuable and useful for the ongoing process of the product development process, right? Yeah. Thank you.